Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 67 of the Feeling Good podcast. Hi, David.
Hello, Fabrice.
He's giving me the eye. So, where was I now? We're going to talk today.
67, thought and feeling empathy.
Absolutely. We're going to thought and feeling empathy. But before we move on to that, David, you had some comments on the previous episode on the Disarming Technique. Some people had commented on it, and you wanted to give a response.
Yeah, let me say in general that we're getting a ton of great questions from people, and we're going to have a whole bunch of Ask Davids coming up, both on the 5 secrets in general, as well as other fabulous topics. So we're going to be real short and just address one email I got from someone. It was such an important one. I thought we'd mention it because it was a follow-up on the disarming technique that we did last week.
And it's a point that is being made repeatedly, so it'd be good to address that.
Yeah. As we teach you about the 5 secrets of effective communication, there are certain errors that people make and questions that come up about each of the 5 secrets. And what this listener, you remember from last week, the 5 secrets means when you're under criticism to find truth in what the other person is saying. In fact, it's a good technique to use even when you're not under criticism, because people love it when you find some truth in what they're saying.
The thing is, when you're not under criticism, you may not have anything to disarm. But we talked about the disarming technique, which is specifically when you're being criticized.
Criticized or attacked, to find some truth in the criticism rather than giving in to that human urge to defend yourself and do battle. So this listener had written that he or she, I think it was he, didn't like the idea of the disarming technique because he said, whenever I've turned the other cheek, which is a biblical expression, if someone hits you, turn the other cheek or some such thing. He says, every time I turn the other cheek, I just end up with 2 sore cheeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so he wasn't really big on the disarming technique. And I have several comments on that.
So what did this fellow have to say about the disarming technique?
Oh, he was just concerned that there's a biblical expression to turn the other cheek, and so he said, well, I don't like the disarming technique because every time I've turned the other cheek, I just end up with 2 sore cheeks.
Yeah.
And I think the answer, there's a couple of answers to that, but first it's a tremendously important question, because when I teach, and probably when you teach as well, the 5 secrets to patients or to mental health professionals, people put up resistance to the disarming technique, to thought and feeling empathy. There's errors that people make at each level. And one of the fears and errors about the disarming technique is the thought, if I agree with someone who's critical of me, some terrible thing will happen. Right. And what's really going on is that when you get a bad response to the 5 secrets, it's 99.9% of the time it's because you're not using them in a skillful way. Mm-hmm. It's really, I can't emphasize this enough, learning the 5 secrets is like learning to play a musical instrument. And if you don't have the training, if you don't have the practice, if you haven't worked at it, learned how to play that instrument in a beautiful way, and you just string on the guitar strings or pound on the piano keys, it's not going to feel very good. I once treated a woman who said, I tried the disarming technique with my husband and it didn't work. And I think I've mentioned this on a previous podcast, so I'll be really brief about it. But I was just sure she hadn't comprehended the disarming technique.
Yeah.
And when I said, give me an example of what did your husband say to you and what did you say next? And he had commented on the idea that this beautiful dinner she prepared, that the pork was a bit dry, and then she told him, well, you can take the pork and stick it up your bottom type of thing.
Yes,
and
so that wouldn't be a disarming.
Yeah, that would not be a good example of the disarming technique, but she just didn't comprehend the idea of finding truth in what the other person says. And so we'll get in a later podcast on all the fears people have about empathy, all the listening skills, the fears people have about sharing feelings openly, and the fears that people have about stroking and showing warmth and caring for someone you're in conflict with. But when you write into me with all these excellent questions, and if you're having trouble with one of the 5 secrets of effective communication or all of them, give me a specific example. Write down what exactly did the other person say to you, and then what did you say next? An example of an interaction that was not effective. And mail that to me, and then I'll be delighted to comment on that. And you too, Fabrice, and we'll be able to see exactly why your response backfired, and show exactly how you could improve on that. And that will make our interaction in this series much more fun and dynamic.
I agree, because we often try to answer questions are of a general nature.
Yeah.
And so we kind of make up a potential scenario, but that may not be the same as what the listener wrote in.
They say the devil's in the details, and I guess salvation is in the details as well.
Exactly.
So,
great. Moving on to thought and feeling empathy, which is the topic for today. So this is, certainly a technique that I would say most therapists probably think they're really adept at using. Empathy is the bread and butter of therapy probably from day one. But I think that you have some comments on that assumption.
Oh, yes, but let's say what is thought and feeling empathy first, and what's your assignment for the next week, those of you who are listening, who are practicing. Thought empathy, it means that you repeat the other person's words. If we go back to the idea that the other person, say, is criticizing you, you would repeat what they say, and then paraphrase what they say, and then feeling empathy would be to acknowledge how the other person is probably feeling based on what they said. And then if you want at that point throw in inquiry, you would ask a question: Did I get it right? Can you tell me more about
in fact,
that?
We'll see an example of that later.
Absolutely, and actually therapists don't do a good job on this, and mothers and fathers don't. Humans in general don't do this.
Why not? Because that seems fairly straightforward.
Yes, and
you repeat what they say, and you try to imagine how they're feeling.
Sure, and people learn this in graduate school too. It goes back to Carl Rogers. They saw him paraphrasing what people said, and he was saying that empathy is the necessary and sufficient condition for personality change. And so people think they can do it. Now, there are common thought empathy errors and common feeling empathy errors. The common thought empathy error is that, let's say the person is being critical of you. Oh, Dr. Burns, I've been coming to you for 2 years, and I'm more depressed today than the first day I came to see you, and I'm doing all your damn homework, and I'm paying you good money for this therapy, and it's not helping. So that would be a pretty strong attack on a therapist. Well, the first error that therapists make is not to jot down, to take notes what the patient is saying, and instead you get caught up with how you're going to defend yourself, and by the time you respond to the patient, you can't even remember part or all of what the patient says, and you talk off on right angles. And just as an experiment, for the listeners, and this is for lay people as well as for therapists. Just pause the recording right now and write down on a piece of paper what you think I just said. To summarize that, because when I do this in workshops, and don't listen to it again because that's cheating.
Right, yeah.
Just you heard me say it. Yeah. See if you can write it down, and then when you come back on, I'll tell you how people do in workshops and what they miss and why they miss. And then we'll go on to what is feeling empathy.
And the thing to point out is, the listeners are not even being attacked right now, so there's nothing to defend against.
Exactly.
All they have to do is remember what you said in the previous 30 seconds. You know?
Exactly. So, well, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Or assuming your recording is off and you've got a piece of paper and you actually wrote something down.
Yeah.
Okay, are we back on now?
We're back on.
Okay, well, I hope you did that. I hope you did your homework, because this will be a difference. If you do the homework, you're going to learn a lot more. And also, if you get my book, Feeling Good Together, there's a lot of good exercises on all these techniques in that book. You can order it from Amazon. Well, I made 4 criticisms of the therapist, and when I ask people to do this in workshops, I'll come up and confront someone and let them try thought empathy, and typically they'll edit out 2 of the 4 things. Uh-huh. And the 4 things that I said were number 1, I'm not getting better. I'm worse today than the first day when I came in. Number 2, I'm doing all of your expletive homework. I'm paying you good money. Yeah. And what was the 4th thing?
I have no idea.
I don't either. Let's see. I've been coming to see you for more than 2 years.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see how easy it is to forget this stuff.
Even when you make it up.
Yes. Yeah. So that's right. And there are several reasons that we forget. But sometimes these things are threatening to you, to a parent, if you hear an attack from your child, for example, or from your spouse. And also the thing that you get so flooded, and if you don't take notes, you can't remember it. And then if you try to summarize what the other person says and you edit out part of it, the other person will get very ticked off, and the problem will escalate. Now, when I tell therapists, you can't get an A+ in empathy without taking notes when you're doing a role play or when you're with a real patient. A lot of them, I would say 3/4 of them, ignore the advice because they don't want to take notes. They think somehow this will interfere with a therapeutic relationship. But the opposite is true. If you don't take notes, you're not going to get an A on empathy because you're going to miss it. And if you do take notes, it's going to be easy to get an A+ because you get exactly what the other person said to you. And one more quick comment on thought empathy before we go on with the same example to feeling empathy. We had a psychiatric resident at Stanford, and she absolutely could not do thought empathy, even in role plays. We would have her sit down and someone would play a patient and then shoot a few criticisms at the therapist, and then the therapist, your job is to repeat what the patient says and acknowledge how the patient is feeling. And she couldn't get it at all. And it was so strange because this is a very high IQ resident. And then
what would she say instead of...
She just said, I have no idea what you just said. I'm just feeling in a state of total panic.
Oh, she was overwhelmed and flooded, yeah.
Yeah, and then she confessed that when growing up, she'd had a very violent father who was alcoholic, and I guess she was witness to a lot of terrifying interactions, probably between her parents, and maybe her father was threatening to her, and so. Once we helped her work through that feeling of, I'm no good when I'm being attacked, and get her self-esteem back, and then we had her practice just write down what the person is saying, And then she was able to develop tremendous thought empathy skills, and now is one of the most highly valued Stanford faculty people. I probably mentioned her in a previous podcast, but that was a great example of how what we think thought empathy, we think it's so easy. It's not easy.
Now, before we move on to feeling empathy, there's a common criticism that is done about thought empathy. It's like, well, aren't I going to just parrot what they say, and it's not going to sound like very weird? Just repeat the exact same thing they just said.
Absolutely, and that's one of many errors people make when using thought and feeling empathy. And the reason for that is because you're not combining it with an I feel statement, and you're just parroting back the other person's words, and it's an embarrassing and ridiculous error. There's tons of other errors you can make in thought and feeling empathy, but this is one of the one of the worst. Is it okay if we do a role play and demonstrate that error? So you can be my spouse,
okay,
and I'll be David.
Yeah.
Or we could, well, let's do it that way. Now, keep in mind, I'm illustrating bad technique.
Okay.
So please don't slam me in the email, say you sounded like a nut. I'm going to try to sound like a nut.
Okay, so imagine like a title going across the screen saying, "This is a bad technique."
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you never pay attention to me, and you never ask me how my day went, and I just can't stand this anymore.
Yeah, you're saying I never pay attention to you, and I never ask how your day went, and you can't stand it anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So
what do you have to say to that?
Say that again?
What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, you're asking what I have to say to that.
Are you going to stop repeating what I'm saying?
You're asking me if I'm going to stop repeating what you're saying.
Expletive you.
Right. Expletive me. So hopefully you can see how nutty that feels.
Yeah.
But if you combine it with feeling empathy and an I feel statement, it'll sound a lot softer, more human. So to say, wow, what you're telling me is painful right now. And if you had some disarming technique, and what you're saying is right, I think I've been using these techniques like a gimmick, and I can imagine you're feeling pretty ticked off.
Right. So now it's all wrapped into the whole 5 secrets.
Beautiful.
By the way, one thing I wanted to point out, because it's been pointed to me before, you said "wow." Just that word "wow" is an I feel statement.
Absolutely. And the general teaching point is none of the 5 secrets will work unless they come from the heart.
Yeah.
And if you do it as a manipulation, it will fail. Now, feeling empathy is, given what the other person said, how is he or she likely to be feeling? And we can't know exactly how they're feeling, but you can say, now let's take this patient says, I'm not getting better, I've been coming for 2 years, I'm doing all your expletive homework, and I'm paying you good money, and you're not helping me. So those are the 4 criticisms, and we summarize here's what I'm hearing you say. It's kind of sad and disturbed to hearing this, but you're saying A, B, C, and D. That's the thought empathy that we already modeled. And then I think we modeled it, didn't we? And then the feeling empathy is, how is that person feeling? What are the name of that person's feelings? And maybe I can remember to put the feeling words chart on the show notes. I think I put it on the show notes to one of our previous episodes.
You've done that before, but it'd be good to have like a list of resources somewhere.
So what are the names of the patient's feelings who says, I've been coming for 2 years, I'm not getting better. And by the way, if you're a parent, we'll show you how to do this with your children too, because that'll be a slightly different context.
Yeah.
But let's stick with
this.
We
have one episode on children.
Yeah, I'm doing all your darn homework, and I'm paying you good money. Let's make a list, Fabrice. What are the emotions that this person is likely feeling?
Well, there's definitely frustration, maybe some anger or resentment toward the therapist.
Right.
I would think some hopelessness, like this is not going to help me. I knew it.
Right.
say possibly some sense of inferiority because I can't do this. I'm failing again.
That's a good thought. How about disappointment?
Disappointment for sure. Yes,
So how would we then do feeling empathy? You wanna model it?
Yes. So the feeling empathy, you don't tell people how they feel, but you let them know that you're having some intuition about how they feel. So it sounds something like this. I would imagine that you might feel a little bit frustrated and disappointed that this is not working, and I would think even you might be a little bit angry at me, and I certainly would understand that, and feeling a little bit saddened that I sense some hopelessness in your statement, and I would also think that there would might be a sense that you might not be up to your own standards, and you might feel a bit of inadequacy about this.
And then finish it with, I give you an A+ on that, and then finish with an inquiry.
Yeah, so because that's the wrap up that you always want. You always want to invite people to say more. It's like, well, I'm not sure if I'm getting you right, but I'd love to hear more from you about this.
Yeah, and I would give that an A+.
Yeah.
Now, Fabrice, you've made this seem really easy, but it takes a lot of practice, and we're going to just fill this out a little bit for you. But your homework assignment this week, and keep in mind we're asking you to practice one technique at a time, and this will be artificial.
Yes, absolutely.
But because you have to integrate all the 5 secrets to give a good natural A+.
It's like doing scales on the piano.
Yeah, this is like scales on the pianos. And so your job this week, if you're listening, if you really want to learn the 5 secrets, is every day try to use thought and feeling empathy. Should we say 3 times with people?
Yeah.
And they won't probably be criticizing you, but you can still do thought and feeling empathy. So we'll just give you some trivial examples of it, and then we'll show you how this can really be life-changing for you and with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues. But we'll just practice this simplistic kind of silly homework assignment, which will help you understand thought and feeling empathy. So it looks like we got a pretty nice day here today, Fabrice. I see the blue skies finally. Now see if you can do some thought and feeling empathy.
Yeah, it's true. I see that that might be a very nice day. We have some blue skies, and it sounds like you have a little bit of a lilt as you're saying this. It's not like it's making you a little bit giddy and looking forward to the day ahead.
Yeah, so that would be great. That would be an A. How about this one? We still haven't had any rain, and we had those horrible fires in Northern California, and now there's all those fires in Southern California, and we live here right next to the woods, all kinds of trees all around us.
Dang, that's true. All those fires, a couple months ago in Santa Rosa and now in Southern California, and you're looking at your house surrounded by those big trees, wonderful trees, by the way. But it seems that you're feeling a bit worried about this.
Yeah, that's A+. And see, so it's simple. What you're doing is you're accurately repeating what I'm saying and acknowledging how I feel. And although this is a very humble thing, it's generally really appreciated by people. And then if you want to make it seem a bit more human, you can add an I feel statement, like, I'm sad to hear you're so worried, David, or something like that. But that's your assignment.
Yeah, that's the homework. Yeah.
Or let's say somebody. I'll just give one more example. Yeah, I saw that Roy Moore got defeated in Alabama last night, and that Democrat won.
Well, you have to know a little bit about.
Well, I'm from California.
So, so he got defeated. That was a little bit of a surprise, but a good surprise, and you might be celebrating in your internal world, aren't you?
And see, again, I give that an A+.
Yeah.
That just thought empathy and feeling empathy. If he thought I was a Trump supporter, he'd go the other direction and say that must have been disappointing, and you're probably feeling frustrated and ticked off or something like that. But that's your assignment.
Right, because what you're trying to say is, you can use this in all areas of life. And even when somebody says, they repaved the road.
Yeah.
Without even expressing any feeling,
yeah.
If you know anything about the person, you might say, you must be happy about that.
Yeah,
you can always make guesses.
Yeah, they repaved the road, and it really looks beautiful here. All that nice black asphalt. It's all
it's not like a factual thing, but it has feelings embedded
absolutely.
in it.
You can do it if you're in the grocery store and you're checking out something, and you can just have a little interaction with the with the checker. So it's a fairly humble assignment, but it will help you learn this. Now, there's a few errors that we want to point out, as well as some applications that will be important for you. You can use this, particularly if you add the disarming technique to people who are whiners and complainers. And I don't mean to label people, but most of us know somebody who is constantly whining and complaining. Or it could be your own family member who is constantly negative and being pessimistic. And the error that people make is to try to help that person or to give advice, and if you do that, they're just going to eat you alive. They'll just keep whining and complaining. If instead you just use thought and feeling empathy, maybe throw in a little stroking, a little I feel statements, it works very well.
Let me run something by you. We're talking here kind of like about the do's and don'ts of empathy.
Yeah.
And I've made a list of don'ts, and so I never checked that with you. Let me see if
maybe we put on the show notes.
If I got this correct. Some of the don'ts of do nots of empathy would be: don't try to fix it.
Yes.
Don't defend.
Right.
Don't attack.
Right.
Don't withdraw.
Right. And here's some more. Don't try to rescue the person.
Yeah.
Don't give advice.
Yeah.
Don't correct their distortions.
Yeah.
And I call empathy, and we've said this before, the zero technique.
Don't justify yourself.
Yeah, don't justify yourself. Don't defend yourself.
Yeah.
And it's the zero technique. You give nothing to the other person and zero in on what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
You're seeing the world through the other person's eyes. There's one last thing that I want to say about thought and feeling and empathy and how this could be life-changing for some of our listeners. Although it might be hard for you to follow this advice due to emotional factors. But let's say you have a son or daughter who is depressed.
Yeah.
And will be complaining a lot. I'm not pretty enough. I feel worthless. I'm no good. I'm not very popular. I'm not a good athlete. All these self criticisms. The error that those our listeners, that you our listeners are making, that 99%, I say, of parents, the error is to try to reassure that person, to try to cheer that person up.
Yeah.
And this always fails pretty much, almost always. It's condescending. It sends the message to the person that what they're saying isn't valid, and it's just like more failure, really. And it's codependent. It's a codependent relationship where you're thinking you have to help this person who can't help themselves, and it certainly comes from your love for your child. or from your family member or your friend who's depressed. But in my experience, it's rarely effective and frequently even more upsetting to the person. And here is one area where the thought and feeling empathy can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
To repeat the words of the person who's depressed. Gosh, you're saying that you're not pretty enough, and that you're not getting A's and X, Y, and Z. And I can imagine you're feeling lonely and hurt and angry and kind of inadequate. And then you could put in an I feel statement as my heart goes out to you because I love you so much, and it's painful to hear you suffering. And then inquiry, can you tell me more about that? I really want to hear what it's been like for you. And that's like pure thought and feeling empathy and inquiry without trying to change or help the other person.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes people can't follow advice because it's so alien to the way you normally function, and the compulsion to throw help at people can sometimes be so overwhelming that people just can't resist it. I would say it took me quite a few years of practice in life before I developed hopefully the wisdom to comprehend this finally.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many people be immediately helped by thought and feeling empathy and inquiry with some stroking and I feel statements, but without trying to help that person. Now you probably can't cure most depressions this way, but you can certainly improve the way the person is feeling. And sometimes you have to limit your goals to realize what you can achieve and can't achieve. As a parent, maybe you don't have the skills and the therapy techniques to cure depression in a friend or a family member.
Yeah.
But you can certainly develop a warm and compassionate relationship with that person if you work at these tools and use them in a skillful and caring way.
Yeah.
So I think we've pretty much covered most of it. I'm sure we left some stuff out, but I thought
we have a treat for our listeners. We've been talking a lot about the Tuesday group, and we actually have a little clip, a recording of one of your Tuesday groups. There was somebody who volunteered to be the patient, Rhonda, and we won't play the whole thing, but just as an illustration of thought and feeling empathy, she was given empathy by one of the group members, and it was pretty good, but it kind of fell a little bit flat. She gave it a B+.
And let me just set up quickly what it was, so they'll understand this.
Yeah, it was the situation.
So you're going to hear some live therapy again that was conducted at my Tuesday training group, and Rhonda was courageously volunteered to be our patient. And what had happened with her, it's a therapy issue, but it's a human issue too, because it has to do with what happens when you're criticized.
Yeah.
And how do we feel and how do we react? And she had been teaching a group of therapists about team therapy and with a colleague named Heather, who's her co-leader. And at the end of the evening, she got some feedback. We always get feedback on our teaching, and we have to figure out how to get feedback on these podcasts too. That would be good.
We need to start doing something like that.
Maybe we get an automated where they can go to a Google thing and we'll automatically get that. We could create that. But at any rate, she got some what to us would seem like very mildly negative feedback. It was not severe, but the way something affects us is how we think about it. And, and the person had written down something like, the session is going to help you, Rhonda, with your leadership skills or something, which actually sounds nice, but she took it as a condescending put down.
Yeah.
And and I guess her vulnerable spot is maybe she doesn't talk up in groups. And so she felt extremely hurt and down by this, and she'd been pretty down for a couple of weeks when she came to the group. And so Jill Levitt was my main co-therapist. Sorry for bumping the mic there. And I love working with Jill, and you're going to hear her brilliance. But initially I asked another colleague to try to provide some empathy for Rhonda.
Yeah.
And he made the mistake of talking about himself and times that he had been criticized in when he was teaching.
Which in some context would make sense, but
it's kind of an I feel statement, self-disclosure. Yeah. But the problem was he wasn't using thought and feeling empathy to zero in on how she was feeling.
Right.
And when we asked her to grade it, she gave him a B+, which was a polite grade, because she actually felt kind of hurt by that feedback because he was ignoring how she felt.
Yeah, and in fact, if you don't mind, why don't we play her response to the feeling empathy?
Awesome.
Actually, I would kind of give you a B+ also, because you started off with the I feel statements and about how this is something that you've experienced. And so one of my thoughts is that my needs are second to everyone else's. So I thought, well, so here that kind of played into my pattern. Like, I would have preferred that go last.
Yeah. So that's that was her response, and it kind of goes along with what you said. But so what I would like to do is I'd like to play Jill's response. I don't think that Jill was given a grade by Rhonda, but as far as I can tell, Jill really zeroed in, as you said, on Rhonda's thoughts and feeling. And in fact. If I was not at that group, but I think that Jill got there a little bit late, and so she didn't hear the whole story. Isn't that right?
Yeah, she didn't know exactly what Rhonda was upset about. Knew she'd gotten some negative feedback, but you can hear really a master of empathy, Jill Levitt, responding to Rhonda, and you'll see really world-class thought empathy, feeling empathy, compassion, humility. I feel statement. You'll hear something that to my ear is really superlative, and I think to Rhonda's ear as well was an A+ on empathy.
And also what I liked about Jill's response is, even though she didn't have everything that she needed as information, she was able to do a lot of inquiry. First, as she was responding to Rhonda, she was checking in and saying, well, am I getting this right? She did that a few times. And also...
When she said, am I getting this right, which of the 5 secrets is that?
That would be inquiry.
Exactly.
She also used the mood journal that she had in front of her to kind of go, oh, it sounds like, this is what happened, and this must be how you felt about it. So she used all the things she had at her disposal to be really accurate.
Yeah.
So let's play that part.
Well, first I just wanted to say, Rhonda, that unlike Daniel, I do know you, and so I actually am having a lot of emotions. I feel kind of choked up, and I mean, like, I almost feel tearful. I feel so sad to know that you're feeling so upset, and I know you to be someone who works so hard and is so committed, and that you and Heather, have consulted and we do this Train the Trainers group, and they've consulted on this challenging group they run together, and I know how hard you're working and what high standards you have, and so I feel it really, my heart goes out to you. I feel sad that that you got, I don't know, I didn't even hear the whole backstory, but that you got feedback that was hurtful to you and that has made you feel sad and inferior and inadequate and defective and also embarrassed and I guess I wanted to give you a little bit of thought empathy too to see if I'm understanding you correctly. But first, I guess I can ask, do you feel like I'm getting the gist of it in terms of your feelings?
Yes.
So it also sounds like you've been struggling with like having heard this feedback that this is giving Rhonda an opportunity to grow. It's made you feel less than and like that you don't have.
Giving me an opportunity to develop my leadership skills.
Oh, I wrote the wrong thing down. So the feedback was this
She was
group is
grateful
giving.
to give me the opportunity to develop my leadership skills.
Oh, sorry. It was to develop. Yeah. So the feedback was that. Say it one more time for everyone.
It felt really condescending, and it felt like I'm not known, and I don't need to develop my leadership skills. So, like my ego was like.
And I'm guessing since you co-lead the group with Heather, I don't know if you talked about this, but then did that make you feel then like Heather's the leader and I'm the one who's still needing to develop my leadership skills?
Yeah. That's why I said I was the identified patient. But it's not really about Heather.
Right, no, but it's Heather is beside you and they're pointing out that you're working on developing your leadership skills.
Yeah.
Is that
right?
Okay. That sounds like a big ouch. Like I can understand feeling kind of kicked in the teeth from that statement, and so you thought I have nothing of value to say, and my job is only to take care of everyone else. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like my job is only to take care of everyone else. I'm wondering how that was connected to that.
It just kind of exploded.
And other thoughts, I'm dismissible again. Like if I'm not a leader, then I'm disposable, dismissible. Mm-hmm. If I speak up, no one will listen. So you said it kind of exploded, and so all of these kind of feelings of insecurity came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it also sounds like you're saying, so if I speak up, no one will listen. So then I'm not going to speak up. And then if I don't speak up for a while, then eventually I'll just explode.
Yeah.
Right. And so then your strategy would be to withdraw, which means then you're not going to be a leader.
Right.
Okay. And so do you feel like I'm getting that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was quite a masterful demonstration.
Yes, and I just love teaching with Jill. I love working with you, Fabrice, too. Every time Jill speaks, I learn things, and when she's doing therapy, she's just about at the top of the scale, because she combines great warmth and compassion with fabulous technical skills, and just a pleasure to teach with her and to do co-therapy with her.
Yeah, and I want to tell our listeners that for those of you who are more recent listeners, we did an entire live session with Jill as a co-therapist. So if they want to hear her, really apply her skills to the fullest extent, and they might want to go back to some of her earlier episodes. I don't have the numbers right now, but...
Right, she was my co-therapist in
Mark,
the session with Mark, who thought he was a failure as a father, and you can hear more of prime Jill, fabulous work in that. Now, next session, we're going to do I feel statements, and then the next one after that, stroking. And Helen will be returning. She couldn't join us this morning, but we got a lot of praise for Helen in the last two podcasts.
Yeah, so I look forward to that too, yeah. All right, well, thanks, David.
Thank you, Fabrice.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.